Hello, everybody. Welcome to the new episode of the TMM Podcast, Season 0, Episode 5. And I'm here with Matthew from the epic and great France place where they make cheese and wine. And bomb-proof cases, of course. Yes. Okay, so why Amazon? It was because at that time there was nothing else. I think Azure was, I'm not sure. So Google Cloud existed already, but it was very limited. And I don't think Azure was a thing yet, or it was just starting and I didn't even know that it existed. And the Google Cloud, I've seen in the past some developer using it, and I wasn't super a site about the prospect, and for whatever reason, AWS made more sense to me, even though that I knew nothing. And also for whatever reason, it felt like AWS is a proper cloud provider, where Google was more, hey, we have these data centers, why don't we do something with them? It was more, it felt like a side project, where AWS, it felt like, no, we are serious about this. More, I've had this like feeling at that time. And then the question was like how I started. Yeah, so I started simple, and then why I focus on AWS, right? So I started with, of course, EC2 servers. I guess at that time in 2016, even before that, I mean, you started, if you were like the early adopter, you started with S3, right? But then once you had EC2 instances, that's the first thing that you do is like, okay, let me deploy my custom code into this project, into the EC2. And at that time, we needed, because I was working for a client where everything was hosted on Heroku. And Heroku is quite easy to create a project, deploy it. In the background, I use the AWS infrastructure, but they make a very easy to use interface. But the problem with that client was we needed to have socket connections. Because we were using IoT devices that were connecting over a socket connection at a custom port, and we needed to be able to send data back and forth, where Heroku only supported the 445 port, and you were only able to do HTTP. And so for that reason, the company asked me, hey, do some research with this EC2 stuff and figure out how it works. And that was my first interaction. And then after the project was finished, I learned about Lambda functions, and I got very curious about how they work and what they are and what you can do with them. And that's when I started poking around and realized, oh, wait a moment, this AWS thing is way more extensive and way more complex and way more interesting than anything that I ever played with. And so I realized if I invest, so at that time it felt super complicated to get into AWS. But sometimes I have this mindset where I go, I will force through the pain and actually go through and learn something, because I understand at the moment that you learn something, then it becomes simple, right? So you have to go through this this layer of pain, and then you're on the other side, and everything is simple and easy. And so I took it as a challenge, and then I also realized that it's going to be a very interesting skill to have, because since it's so complicated, the competition on the market is going to be much lower, and so that will provide me a better base for the future, right? So that was also one of my motivations, like to learn it and understand it correctly. So then I'm more attractive to prospects that need help with AWS. Yeah. Yes, I guess. Yeah. God damn, really? The time flies so fast. That's crazy. Yes, yeah, and you're right. And before that, if I'm not mistaken, SQS was the actually first service that they had, which was sold under the brand of Amazon.com. It was not sold even under AWS. So I think SQS is the oldest thing, and then you have S3 as the official under AWS. Um, so yeah, they've been around for a long time, and they all had 7 years of lead time from their competition, which is kind of unheard of. And so that's why they were able to frog leap the competition, and that's why maybe I got this vibe from Google Cloud that they're not that serious and they don't feel as solid as what AWS was offering. Um, and so, yeah, maybe that's also was a part of the reasoning why I felt strongly about AWS. Hmm. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, yes, I would say yes. But I'm so yes. Let me, because lately I'm not changing my mind, but I'm seeing, there was this period of, let's say, 5 years of this serverless craze that everybody were talking about, and I think I'm getting out of this honeymoon phase and starting to look at the services that AWS provides and better are realizing what they're doing. And so, yes, there's a lot of serverless features, services that they have, which are cool, because it's true that you don't have to truly manage them. So manage them meaning you don't have to worry about the operating system at all, right? So the security complexity like goes away, so you don't have to worry about that because AWS does it for you, right? So that's a nice relief that you can have. Um, and also when it comes to scaling, it's nice that when you get a lot of traffic from time to time, you don't have to worry about what your infrastructure if you set it up correctly, right? Because serverless also needs to be set up correctly to work well in that scenario. Um, But even if you do it wrong, you still have this buffer that if something happens, you can handle the hit and for sure pay a little bit more, but at least your website is up and running. So that also is nice because you don't have to think about it. But also, I think right now they're creating so many services in AWS that they're competing with each other, or they don't even make sense. Where, for example, there's a bunch of services that it seems to me that AWS creates only for their very high-paying customers, because they're trying to solve problems of the Fortune 500 companies that they have, right? One of those companies for sure comes to them and say, we have this problem, and instead of AWS teaching them, hey, if you use DynamoDB this way, Lambda this way, AppSync this way, Incognito this way, you can solve 90% of your problems, right? But instead, they say like, okay, let us create a new service that probably you are going to just use it. But they put it on the market anyway, which then confuses people because people think this is the new thing that you have to use. And then when you play with it and go deep, and you realize, wait a moment, this is crap. The configuration is all messed up. This doesn't work. There is some part missing, and you go, what is this monstrosity that they're trying to sell me? And so there are a bunch of services that are redundant, and you can do a lot with what I just mentioned. Plus, for example, SQS, SNS, and SES. So if you, for example, host your website, you can host your website on S3, deliver it using CloudFront. Then you can, if you use AppSync to connect the front end with the back end, for example, with DynamoDB, Lambda, RDS, or HTTP requests to third parties, and you use Cognito, and then you use Cognito the right way, where you can actually create a very granular access to your data based on the Cognito user attributes. So you can have an attribute that says manager, and then in AppSync you can say like this one field, this one this one item, like let's say the last name can only be accessed by managers, and the address can only be accessed by admins. So you can specify very, very granularly what you can do where. And with this basic services, you can create basically anything. Whereas, so I was thinking about an example of something that is redundant, like, oh, I know, step functions. Step functions are a thing where they claim that they claim that it's easier for you, so you have to write less code, so they can handle errors for you, and you don't have to worry about handling errors anymore, because you can visualize your lambdas in a graph way. Okay, so it's a problem like, who cares how you can visualize? You just have to have a team that knows what they're doing, right? That you don't need to use this service to visualize your lambdas. And yes, it's cute that you can step function handle if statements and error situations, that you can go back to a loop, and basically you're designing a diagram if this then that kind of situation, and then you just plug your code, and the code receives the payload and does something with it, and tells the next step to do something else with the next piece of information. But then you end up having to pay a huge amount of money just to store logs. If you write more than 2,500 logs entries, then your step function breaks, like they stop the function. Then you have to have a special lambda that restarts the function. Of course, when there is an error, you have to have a logic to restart the function again when there is an error. After 1 year of a step function running, you have to have a lambda that restarts the step function. So it's a service that is cool on the surface, but when you start playing, because I did 2 implementation with it, and at the end of the day, I realized, what is this for? Like, it's not helping me with anything. Because yes, I can write an if statement and do some checks. I don't need AWS to do it for me. So there is sometimes there are services. Also, there is a lot of container services that they have. Um, that is reaching to a meme point when every time AWS says, we have a new service for Docker containers, everybody laughs, right? It's like, oh, Jesus, yet another one. And they're very similar, but not quite. Um, and and it's like, here, guys, it's we have enough of stuff to work with when it comes to AWS. So sorry for a long thing, but that's my take on um, the serverless world and what AWS is doing with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they still have a place, right? They still have a place. Of course, it's good. So, for example, serverless is known to be more expensive, right? And that's true because if you have your own EC2 instance, it's going to be cheaper in the long run. But the problem is, it's not. It's a little bit more complicated to set it up to auto scale, right? Um, what I like about the serverless thing is it's nice when you start a project using Lambda functions, especially in the beginning of a project, because then you pay zero because nobody's using, so you can develop without spending $200 a month just on keeping some servers up and running. Then, if the project starts getting more popular, you can see which Lambda is the most popular one and it's the most expensive one. And then you can see, can I tweak the code or can I do something to make it cheaper? Or then if you can't, you can just move that piece of code into a EC2 instance, right? And then you can have a fixed price. You can set up the scaling. You can pay 3 years in advance. You can pay very little money for that server. And then you can start mixing the two worlds and see what makes sense to move where, right? Um, so that's actually also something that they recommend people do um, if they want to be in AWS and they're not sure which direction to go. Mhm. The startup world is like give admin access to everybody. Mhm. I think no company cares about it. They're just forced every time they get hacked to do it the right way. Right? That's the problem. Um, I try to care. I try to make secure networks, but it is hard to convince people that pay you to spend the time to do it right. Uh, but overall, basically, yeah, VPC, I would say like what AWS did is you can do whatever you want. So basically, you have your virtual, networking that they have here. It's basically in the cloud, so you can literally do whatever you want with the networking. You can mess up the routing as much as you want. Um, and yeah, the only I would say a little bit of a downside is the UI, it's not super clear in some cases, and also they decided to use their custom names to old ideas, and so sometimes it gets confusing. What are you looking at? And then you do some research on Google and find like, oh, this name is actually equals this thing. So that's the only little bit of a challenge, but if you are a network person that understand networking, I think in a week you would be able to figure out how to use a VPC and set it up and do all the availability zones and have your private network, public network, and all that crazy stuff. And yeah, everything is pretty powerful. Um, yeah, and you can literally do whatever crazy setup configuration that your heart desire. And yeah, the only thing that is a little bit annoying is, um, and I guess they do it for money, um, is when you want to have a availability zone with a fixed IP, public IP. Um, you have to set up a NAT server, and they do it for you. And in the background, what they're doing, they're just spinning up by EC2 instance, and they make you pay $32 a month for it. So there is no way for you to, for example, say, I like to use the smallest EC2 instance because I have one Lambda that literally makes a request once a week to get the weather, and they want to, whitelist my AP. And you have to pay for that little stupid thing, let's say $32 a month. You might say like, hey, I'm a Fortune 500 company. What do I care? Yes, but if you have 500 VPCs with 500 IPs times 32, you do the math, right? It gets pretty expensive very, very quickly. And so yeah, it's weird that they don't allow you to set up to pick or choose a pricing, cheaper pricing, because in the past they allowed you no in the past you had to set up your own NAT server with an EC2 instance, and that was turns out that was too complicated for people, and then they went, okay, too many people are complaining, let's hide the complexity, but then they didn't expose any little bit at least wiggle room to lower the price, especially for workloads that don't require too much traffic, because I don't remember which EC2 instance they're spinning, but they're spinning up one that has like a beefy network card, which I think in 99% of the cases is wasteful, and you would be more than enough with the tiniest nano or micro EC2 instance that's out there. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yes. Hmm. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So one thing to note, Cognito is a service that allows you to build a project for yourself and give access to your project. Where normally you give access to the AWS console through a YAM user. So that's just to make sure that people know the difference. With using YAM, also can be pretty granular because you can, yeah, could you have the same granularity with Cognito and AppSync? No, you couldn't because you could not, for example, lock down a specific cell from the table, right? Or sorry, a specific column. Um, or could you? Actually, I don't know. I never had to be so granular with a YAM role um, to do that, so not sure. But with Cognito and AppSync, those two services together, when you're building your own application to, let's say, you even have, a company database where you have, a support team that has to check some client's data. If you wrote your little custom dashboard and use Cognito for your staff members of the support team, plus AppSync, then yeah, you can literally say that you don't have access, that like this level of, I don't know, this group can access this piece of information, that group can access this piece of information. Um, so that's something quite powerful that solves so many problems when it comes to especially building SaaS application where you have multiple users accessing the same database. So in the past, you had to create your own custom logic and craziness to check for these type of scenarios. Where now with AppSync is literally add a new attributes to the user incognito, update the schema that says you have this to access this cell, this key, this column, whatever you want to call it. The attributes needs to be equal manager, and you're done. And just update um, the schema in AppSync, and you're finished with that. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Oh yeah. Hmm. 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 Yes. Correct. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Hmm. 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 Okay. Hmm. 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 Right. Hmm. 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 Okay. Hmm. Yeah. So yeah. Right. So yeah. So exactly, that's something that very few people know that it exists. The AWS has a SDK written in JavaScript for the browser. So if you wanted to, you could rewrite the AWS console if you don't like it, and mimic 100% the same experience, because you can call any AWS service from from a website. So what that allows you to do is you could have a admin console for your staff member that log in, that where where the user is stored incognito, and then when they log in, they get a role attached to their identity, and in that role you can specify, admin access to everything, and they literally, if the UI allows it, you could, list all the EC2 instances that they have, start, stop, whatever you want. You could literally surface the few services that the technicians would need to access to do some changes. Um, and so then, yeah, then you have, since you're working with a role and a bunch of policies, then you can write the policies in a way that the technician have only access to whatever he needs, and then you have to just make a pretty UI for this person to use, so they don't have to go into the AWS console and by mistake do something that they shouldn't, right? Or maybe they get lost because they do something once a year, and they don't remember, and maybe AWS changed something, and now it's a little bit different because they like to change data in the last 2 years UIs, of every service every 5 minutes, which is sometimes annoying. And so if, yeah, you could make your own little console just for technicians so they can only do whatever they have to do. And yeah, you would use a cognito user with a role attached to it, and they could do whatever they want. Mhm. Yes. Yes, that's a good point because in the roles, YAM roles, you have a section called conditions. In those conditions, you have if-else statements. You can say, if this, then if this matches this, then you can do this action, right? I, uh, I don't remember if in that condition section you have access to cognito attributes. I have the suspicion that yes, you have, but don't quote me on this. But I think you should for sure. What you can do based on the attribute. Okay, 100% that I know is that depending on the attributes, you can attach different roles to the user. So you can have a role for an admin technician, you can have a role for a junior technician, and depending on the attributes, then you attach different roles to different people that are logging in. So you can for sure do that, but that's a good point. I don't know if you can access the attributes from within the role itself. Something to check for sure. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, with roles, it's yeah, it's quite yeah, that part is quite complicated. Yeah, and that part also quite like roles are in general complicated. So yeah, sorry. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's to me, every time I use it, I go, how is this even working? Because it's honestly, yeah, when you look at the granularity level, you go like, wait a second, you have to check for so many things every second for every request. Like, how is this even technically done? That like the YAM section of AWS is a masterpiece. Like what they created and the even the vision to realize, wait a moment, we're going to grow, we're going to need, lots of granularity. Like to have that vision, it's quite impressive. And yeah, kudos to whoever was the manager and made it work. No, thanks, maybe something. X dot 400, right? No, I mean, I something that's why I knew that there's a dot somewhere, but yeah, I don't remember what it is for exactly. Hmm. Hmm. Mm. Right. Hmm. Ah, right. Hmm. 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 Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, because I think if you have your in your company a Windows network with AD and Kerberos and everything else, you can you have also a super amazing granularity when you can specify that if someone opens a file from a network drive, you have 5 minutes to read it, or you can open it only once at a specific hours. You can be super. I mean, you can do the exactly. That was a good point. You can do the same exact thing in a YAML role. You can say you have access to this data from this hour to this hour, right? Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Mm. Good point. Mm. Ooh, I will have to stand corrected. Yeah, I would have to. Yeah, you can. In the YAM section of the dashboard, you have the option to connect to a LDAP server. Never done it. Mhm. Right. Yeah. But you could have a LDAP server, have the Linux box configured to talk with the LDAP server, right? And then the LDAP server could be connected to yeah, proxy thing. Yeah, because you would make the user on the LDAP server, which then would propagate to a YAM as a YAM user, and then, for example, you can manage your user in AWS through that thing. Right. So I have no expertise on that topic because I never did it. I was always curious to know how it works. So I had once a short chat with the AWS tech support to understand even how it works. Like, what does it mean? Like, you create YAM users automatically? Like, how does it work, right? So it was just a virtual discussion in theory, not practice. So I know that this feature exists. I know that it should work. Never played with it though. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that part of technology of IT, it's not solved. There isn't the one standard way of doing this because I also constantly think, especially in this era where everybody's working now remotely. Yeah, there is no way to remotely manage a laptop of an employee because it's their private laptop, right? You would have to send the company one, and then what do you do? How do you manage? Someone wants a Windows machine, someone wants a Linux one, someone wants a Mac version, and then, yeah, everything is so. You have an amazing granularity on Windows if you use AD, but then you lose it if someone uses a Mac or a Linux, right? Maybe on Linux there is a system that I don't know about. Maybe that is enough to have a little bit more granularity. So it's yeah, this world is a little bit messy when it comes to this type of level of security. Uh-huh. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, system, yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and it's pretty cool because then you don't have to have open SSH ports to the world, right? That's super convenient. Hmm. Yeah, and so you don't have to manage SSH keys. You don't have to send those keys to people that they might forgot, lose. Hmm. Right. Yeah, maybe they should do something something where the SSM would also be the agent would also filter every command that you make before it hits the operating system. Mhm. Right. Mhm. Right. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yeah, me neither. But I was always curious. Yeah, is there a way to do it? Yeah, but yeah, I think like yeah, I don't think there is. Yeah, if there should be a standard for every system that has the same schema, format, JSON object, whatever you want to call it, that has the same format. So at least it's agnostic. Yeah, people should somehow come together and make it work or rewrite it something new that is just standardized and works better, because then that would make a huge difference when it comes to security um, and everything else. Yeah, but when it comes to if you're inside AWS, yeah, you can lock it down in every possible way, and then everybody will scream, "Why don't have an admin access?" Well, yeah. Yeah, AWS give you all the power, but then nobody wants it to make it right. Mhm. Okay. Oh, okay. 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 Right. Let me actually see at all the service that they have. So we have compute, storage, database. Oh, you know what? Yeah, there is one that makes no fucking sense. And I always, it's called Amazon Sumerian. Sumerian. That's how you read it. So it's a 3D game engine that they created that connects to AWS services, and you can make 3D games, the kiosk things, and yeah, and nobody knows. And those are one of that. This is one of the services that was created because a few clients wanted something. So they just made it, and nobody's virtually using this thing. I'm also on a website that collects all the videos on YouTube from different services that AWS has. And now I even see that on the page of the Sumeria, like 90% of the YouTube videos are gone. They don't exist anymore. So AWS just removed them. So all the tutorials that were there, how to work with Sumeria, are gone. So that's how serious they are about this service. Yeah, it's one of those mystical ones that Why they exist, who knows? Who knew you can make 3D games with Amazon? Now you know. Yeah. So I would say my newly discovered one, I would be AppSync, because I think AppSync is the missing glue between the user and AWS. Is the service that is going to be able and is going to be able in the future to give insane granularity access to any service in AWS very easily. So yeah, it's fantastic stuff, and if they keep making it better and better over the years, I think it's going to be a crucial service that you have to use for every project. Something I wanted to see in AWS: remove legacy services that very few people use, that are useless. Like, do a cleanup. We throw stuff on the wall. Now we know what works. Let's remove stuff that doesn't work. And so to simplify the ecosystem a little bit and clean it up and remove the low hanging fruits, because in my opinion right now there is too much. There's too much redundancy, and there is, with all the service that we have, we can rebuild all the services 10 times over. So there's plenty of services out there that you can build whatever you want, and there's even too many of them sometimes. Thank you, Matthew. Nice. It's Yeah, it's close to Bergamo. It's a small town that I don't want to be too east, because there's two people living there, so I don't want to be too precise. Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe.